Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the bench press and chest development. A few things to note here. When you have people who say that the bench press does not build their chest, they can't build a big chest bench pressing, I want to point out that it is largely a case of they are not performing it correctly, they're not programming it correctly for that goal. And yes, it is absolutely possible for guys to have a pretty respectable bench who are very, very delt dominant and still have fairly small pecs. I've seen it in people. I know people who have clients who have this problem. Okay, but some things to think about that we usually see in this case, you usually see that they use a pretty pronounced arch. They usually use a little bit more moderate of a grip, and they rarely do much real high rep work. Okay. You will also notice a lot of those benchers like to do a lot of really high angle incline work. They like to do overhead pressing. They end up doing a lot of shoulder work to me, and their shoulders end up becoming more dominant. All right, but the point is, for decades, people successfully built massive pecs on the bench press. Even some of the top bodybuilders in the world have always said, look, the barbell bench press is the king for chest. They oftentimes do more than that for it, but it absolutely works. So let's stop and think about the things that we need to do if our goal is to build a big chest. And I understand that a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but I find that the people who disagree, it's because they're still wanting to ego lift on it, and some of them still manage to build a chest in spite of it with the bench. Usually because if you just do enough reps and volume, it will eventually work anyways, as long as you can recover from it. But high on the list, a couple things to think about. Wrist stacking. Okay, wrist stacking. That needs to be a priority no matter what you're doing on the bench. It will keep your shoulders healthy. It will help prevent shoulder injuries to some extent. Okay, so always keep those wrists stacked. And it's something that when I took wrist wraps off, I struggled with again. But now I've gotten to where I can keep the bar directly above the wrist bone. So again, very, very important. Now, a couple things that we need to really do if you're trying to build your pecs. And I want to be clear, this will not make your bench go down, guys. Even if you go back to your powerlifting technique, your bench will be big if you've grown all the muscles involved. All right, but let's look at a couple things. Number one, the arch needs to be modest. Now, people say, we call flat back, and people go, but you're still not flat back. It's like, but nobody's flat back. This is no arch. No artificial arch, and that's a big distinction, because if you lay down on a bench, if you've got lats and glutes, there's going to be 5-6 inches between your low back and the bench. Like it's unavoidable. Okay, unless you don't have glutes, unless you don't have lats and traps, like it's going to happen. All right, again, unless that area gets filled back in with fat. So yeah, obviously it's not touching. But we're not creating an artificial arch that's any different than when you're just standing up straight. Okay, so when you lay down, just let what your natural arch is happen. Okay, that's a good way to put more stretch on the pecs. Why? Because you can get a deeper angle, right? The bar goes lower. The lengthened position is where the magic happens. Okay, that's number one. Number two, your grip needs to be a little bit wider. I don't consider what I'm using here to be a particularly wide grip, by the way. It's a nice, good grip for working my pecs. All right, what you're usually shooting for is for your forearms to be about 90 degrees from the floor when you're at the bottom touching the chest. Okay, that's a good spot to be in without tucking them very much to do it. Okay, if you can do that without tucking much and you're low on the chest, you're in a good spot. That is going to create more tension on the pectorals. The reason we're getting more of a stretch, more of a lengthened position. So right off the bat, if we're trying to build the pecs, what do we want to do? We need a deeper stretch in the muscle. All right? We need a deeper stretch in the muscle. Get all these guys who are like, oh, I feel flies in my chest, but not the bench. Well, why? Is it the way you're benching? Because the range of motion should be about the same. The stretch should be about the same. But look at what I'm doing here. Because I feel this, my pecs get a pump, my pecs get sore even from doing this. All right. So we're reducing the arch, going down to just our natural normal arch, we still want to be tight. It's still a full body exercise. We're still digging in or still locking the legs in. Your quads and hamstrings sometimes almost cramp up when you're benching hard if you're tight. I mean, you still want to be tight enough that you can't lift your legs up. You still want to drive your feet in. Okay, you still want all that neural drive. Okay, we don't want to be loose, but you don't want a big arch. The other thing, again, grip wide enough that you're in a good position. Okay, to where you're putting a stretch on the pecs. And if you go too wide, sometimes it can become a little more shoulder dominant again. Because the goal is to increase range of motion on the pec, right? So we're trying to increase the lengthened position, the stretch position, right? So, I mean, just look at the anatomy of what's going on. All right, those are 2 big tips. Right, number 3, pause on the chest. Now, am I saying the pauses need to always be long? No. I think it's particularly good on when you get real close to failure. Maybe your last rep, a longer pause can be really useful. But you need at least a brief pause. You don't want to bounce it. Because if you do, we come back over to you're cheating at the point where the pecs are stretched the most. Force them to work. Force them to do some work. Okay? Now, one of the things you'll notice, there are still people who build massive pecs benching with touch and go, but they're still using these other techniques. And again, they're getting there through just a sheer enough volume. But if you want the most out of each rep, a little brief pause is a good idea. Okay? It's a real good idea. All right, what else? How about higher reps? And again, I'm not saying the science is ever conclusive on this, and I would take it lightly, but data, when it's looked at different rep ranges, has generally found that as the reps get lower because the weight gets closer to our 1 rep max, the lift becomes a little more tricep dominant. Again, another reason that big triceps help with max benches. Okay, something to be said for that. So conversely, if you really want to build a big chest, don't turn it into a tricep exercise. Go do separate tricep work. Okay, and the bench is always going to work the triceps. They're always going to grow from benching. But it shouldn't be your main builder. You can do other stuff for that. If you want to build the pecs with it, bench in a way that builds pecs, like what you see me doing here. Okay? And that means, again, taking the reps maybe a little higher. And performing them the way I'm doing here, the way I'm discussing, you're going to see a lot more pump in your chest. You're going to feel your chest a lot more. You're going to feel a little less shoulder, probably a little less tricep. But you're going to build bigger pecs. And always remember, you can always do extra tricep work and things. I do. I recommend it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.